So, Teen Queen Training is my book. It's an erasure essay collection, and it came out on February 17th, 2026. I began writing it in November 2016, so it is a 10-year project. I actually only worked on it. It took me about a little over 2.5 years to finish it, but it took a long time to find it a home because it's just an odd beast. It's an odd length and it's really messing with form and genres, and it took a while. So I'm very happy. It's out with Autofocus Books, who were the publishers of my last book, Calendars of Snakeskin, and I was very happy to come back to them again because they treated my other oddly shaped book with so much respect.
Yeah, that's hard to find, and awesome. And it's funny because it sounds like you were kind of writing this like right after Me Too kind of started, and now it came out like right around the same time that the Epstein files came out, which is like
It's
wild.
funny because until I was saying right now, like, oh, November 2016, it didn't, I swear to God, it didn't dawn on me. Like, oh, what else was happening then? To me, it felt like it really existed in a bubble, and it, quote unquote, wasn't connected to that. And yet, obviously, it must have been. I mean, I'm a big, big, big believer in the subconscious, like doing work that you're not aware of and adding layers that later you're like, oh, okay, now I can see. And like that's that's really I honestly, like, I'm kind of like knocked out by how I've never considered that before. I like November 2016 is only when I know I started it because I know when the first draft was saved on my computer. And that was totally a like I had found the book in a thrift store. I love reading etiquette books. I think they're so fascinating, and not just in a like, oh, let's pick them apart and laugh at how ridiculous this was. I mean, I loved etiquette. I thought etiquette was like the coolest thing because it was like somebody had written down rules so that like the world ostensibly had something to govern itself by, but also I had something to like, oh, if I can do these things, then these are the natural outcomes. Of course, that's never what happens.
Mhm.
That's the way a teenager thinks. And
Yeah.
that's probably why the whole project really came together that way. But it just happened to be November 2016 when I was flipping through the book, started, I got to the chapter which was called Boys, Boys, Boys. It's actually the fifth chapter in the book. And I had enjoyed before. And then I got to that one, and that one just it really made me like I was reacting quite a lot. And like I can vividly remember sitting in my living room with my family, and I just kept trying to like say sentences from it, and they would all be like, yeah, that's kind of weird. And I'm like, no, 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 you don't understand. Like, can you believe they're saying this? And everyone's like, uh-huh. My oldest was only 8 years old at the time, and my youngest was like a 4 year old. So I think they were like, oh, is that not the case? And, my partner was just like, uh-huh. Yeah, I know. And so I finally was like, okay, shut the mouth. I got to find something else to do with it. So I wanted to save it because I didn't want to just start blacking out the actual book itself, but I really was like, okay, I'm gonna start crossing things off in it. So I went to my printer and like, ran off a copy of the first chapter, and I was like, going through doing all these blacked outs, and I was like, okay, guys, I want you to listen to this. And they all were like, uh-huh. Again, like, here she goes. But and it was raw. It was very raw. It was not shaped into like sentences, but I felt like I was fine. I had turned it into something that sounded more like what I'd thought I was really being told. Like by 17 magazine, which was, I mean, it was kind of the etiquette guide of my era. I was a teen in the late 90s. And so to have this book that was, produced by 17 magazine, even, years earlier, I just was like, yeah, and can you believe what they were saying? And it just started to take on another layer and another life. And it didn't really occur to me and for a couple of weeks afterwards when I was like, oh, I'm going to finish reading. And I would go through and I was like, oh, I kind of want to black this one out too. It didn't occur to me that I was embarking on a project I definitely thought I was just doing like this one essay and it was going to be cool. And I was like, I had taken a class called Experiments in Creative Nonfiction in my graduate program. And I was like, okay, I'm also going to do an experiment. Watch me do some blackout. And you know what? It's not just going to be a blackout. I'm going to start compressing them into sentences. I'm going to turn it into a erasure essay, which I thought was like mind blowing. Like nobody was doing that. I mean, it's still something I don't encounter very frequently, but I felt very like unguided, like it was truly an experiment, that it wasn't really a project. And it was only as I kind of kept going with it and was like, there's more material here. And I think I want to say something with this. And these essays are piling up. And okay, maybe they can be more than just sending one-offs out to journals, but like, what if I did this to the whole book?
Mhm.
So I mean, I said it took me about 2.5 years, and I think that that's probably accurate. I was not working on it every day. I was doing a lot of other writing in between, but it's still, it felt like it had this life that needed to be seen through to its natural conclusion, which was to put them all together and be like, what did I really take from my teens? What did I really take from the guides at the time? And how am I responding to this etiquette guide that was like both what I wanted and what I didn't want?
Mhm. Yeah, I love that so much. I mean, I love the form. I love how it's like an erasure poem, but it's not erased, so you get to
Hmm.
see the like stuff that the next chapter is responding to. And I also love that it's written in the second person, which, like works sometimes. Like I'm kind of like, I used to be like all into the second person. And these days I'm sort of like, you need to have a good reason for it to be in the second person. Like it needs to be a letter or a how-to manual or something. Like let me know why in the
Hmm.
writing. And this one definitely does. It's like, it's sort of like I'm reading it as like a how-to manual of like how it actually looks to be in this experience and in this body, which I feel like it's like a cliche that, all girls are groomed to please men and, sort of constantly fawn and constantly try to like observe the correct way of being while never actually being able to be correct because there's no right way to be a woman or girl or whatever. And like it's a cliche, we talk about it most of the time. When I say it to guys, they are like, if not rolling their eyes, just being like, yeah, I know. But like, this is what it actually looks like in scene, which
Hmm.
I, I think we could, I mean, we really need like 300 books like that.
Right. Well, I appreciate that. And yeah, I mean, when I realized that I was doing everything second person, I thought, okay, it's kind of coming out. At first, it was coming out that way because obviously the book was written to a you. It was written to a second person. The source text was, but I was like, it is also directions to like a former me. It's almost like again, another thing you don't realize until partway through a book, but I didn't realize how much I was writing to my old self saying, you will do this, you will think you're supposed to do this, and or you're being told you do this, you do this. And I think second person is kind of the only way it could be. If it was a first person narrative, it wouldn't it wouldn't speak the same way because there's a lot of inconsistencies in the book. Speaking of boys, which I turned into Boys Boss, I was rereading over that one recently, and it's almost like you can't tell that it seems like a relationship telescopes into a relationship, into kind of not in a relationship, but then she's kissing a boy, but then she's this. And I think that confusion I like it in there. I like it because you're being told what to do, and sometimes you're listening to some of the advice, but then you find yourself in another situation and you're not listening to the advice. And this is kind of, an aside to it, but I think it's interesting to note that most of what happens in the book what didn't necessarily happen to me. Like they're not there are some things in there that are absolutely exact direct transcriptions, and the people who know me will be like, oh, yep, I remember that, or I know exactly what you're talking about here. But there's a lot of other things in there that are kind of how I understood that I would react or that I was supposed to react in a given situation. And so in that way, like I know urges on, elbowing the borders of like, is it really nonfiction then? Is it fiction? And yeah, I mean, I think I consider it more speculative nonfiction in those places because it was definitely how I would have reacted or, being given this situation, what I would have done. What I think I would have done.
Mhm.
But I didn't necessarily go through it. And, there's some of those situations, there's blessings that I didn't.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting. I think about form a lot because like I've been doing a lot more journalism lately. And like with journalism, you're like, it's nonfiction, but you're like bringing in other things, especially like a personal reported essay.
Hmm.
And I feel like with your book and with these kinds of like speculative elements, it's the same thing. You're just like taking like your narrative and then pulling in like a broader generalization of what,
Hmm.
you've heard about or, you know, sort of what's in the ether. It's just not like there's no like link to the experience of someone else, which is nice. It just makes it into a story.
Well, and I mean, I read 17 magazines like they were, the future. Like I expected to be encountering everything that they talked about in there. I thought, okay, good thing I'm taking this quiz on, whatever, because I will definitely face that situation. Okay, good thing I'm reading about this, a first person narrative of somebody they interviewed for here, because I'm sure I'll be facing this. I mean, I thought that it was a literal I read it like it was a manual that I needed to remember. And it's
Yeah.
also most likely why, I saved so many of them,
Mhm.
both through my teen years, but, I've still got, I have one full year from January through December that I saved of 1998. I had to pick one year back when I was, moving out of my parents' house, and I was like, I'm gonna save all of that. But I've got a number of other like ones where there were certain issues
Mhm.
I would just sit and I would read them and I would read them. I mean, I could practically recite them. I know the images on those pages so well because I just imagined myself into them and I saw myself sitting in these situations. And so, yeah, maybe not everything in the essays in my book did directly happen, but like trust me, I considered what would happen if
Yeah.
they did and how I would do them because I saw myself in them.
Yeah, and it's like that is such an essential part of girlhood for this like the 1990s and early aughts generation. Like I was thinking when I was reading your book a lot about the quizzes in 17 magazine and just
Hmm.
like the way that we were like redefining our personality and our
Hmm.
identity based on like these really absurd quizzes, I mean
Uh-huh.
like and just like this constant seeking to like find a place to define yourself, like these magazines gave that to us for better
Hmm.
or worse.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, I definitely wanted it. I wanted to belong. I wanted to identify myself and to understand it. I mean, I think so much about, I have three teenage daughters now, and their adolescence has been so different in so many ways. And I feel like there are more labels now than there were back then. I would have been slapping labels all over myself
Hmm.
back then because I just would have been so happy to be able to put a name to something, to be
Yeah.
able to identify it. And so. Yeah, it's a good point though that you make about the quizzes. They did try to make you believe like you would, see, did I circle mostly A's? Did I circle mostly B's, mostly C's? And then you would look at the end and you were like, oh, I guess that's the type of girl that I am now.
Hmm.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah.
And you would think like, okay, that is me. Meanwhile, the situations were ones where it's like, I mean, you gotta sometimes, you'd have to pick one of three answers and none of them were what you'd really do.
Yeah. No, totally. It was very like limiting, which I think the etiquette book is too. Like it's just so interesting that adults, like past being teenagers, past being girls, write these things to guide girls in a way that is just like grooming them to be like identityless and unhappy for their entire life.
Hmm. Well, and the thing is, it just kind of becomes a cycle because then it's like the girls who grew up that way go, and you just like keep going and keep going and keep going.
Yeah, for so many generations. I mean, it's just like, I mean, I think we're all kind of boggled right now about like the magazine culture is so intrinsically tied to everything about Epstein that
Hmm.
like I had of course no idea, but like even the stuff with like the Cosmopolitan and Elite magazine thing, like all these things like where it's like all that stuff that we're reading about, like the people who were like really
Hmm.
embodying these things that were in the magazines were the ones being shipped off to New York and doing these competitions and ending up on the pages of the magazines. And I am like, it's so like an experience of girlhood, but I'm sort of having this difficult time like figuring out like was it even mine or did it just belong to all these people who tried to create it? And
Oh,
as I was reading your
yeah.
book, I was just thinking about like maybe that's part of the search for identity is that we could just kind of intuit like this isn't ours, you know?
Absolutely. Well, and it aren't we all, when trying to fit into something and to fit into a magazine definition, an etiquette guide, we're fitting into something that's been predetermined for us.
Yeah.
And for those of us who like structure, like me, like we're craving that sort of like belonging structure, it's very easy to fall into it and to realize how long you can go without questioning how much maybe you never even like questioned the box that you were in. You didn't even realize that the box was like right down the sides of your arms and you were truly like very restrained. You didn't check, so you never realized how closed in you were.
Yeah, I think that's true. And it's so like your book is so evocative because it doesn't like specifically say these things, but it just gives you the picture so you can like go into it. And I don't know, I was thinking like I wonder what a guy would say. Like a
Uh-huh.
cis guy would, reading this like what they would think about that. I'm like so interested. I like want to find somebody and like be like read this. Tell me
I
what
know.
you think.
I know one a friend of mine who is male read it and has written a review, and I'm looking forward to seeing what he had to say because
Wow.
it's true. I do wonder. In the book, there's one in the original book. There's one chapter, and it's called "For Men Only," which I turned into "For Me Only," but it's for men only. And what I kept thinking when I read it the first time was like, what do we think women are like bringing this out on a date and handing it to like, hey, do you want to read this one? It's for men only. And it's like, why would it's, I think, chapter 19 also out of 26. Why on earth at that point would anybody really think a man would get to it and would be like, oh, yeah, I'm going to read that? How odd. It's like it was a gestural thing to be like, oh, yeah, we're also speaking to the guys. But like in a book, like with a girl on the cover addressing girl issues 25 out of 26, like no, no, it was not really for men only, it was for me only.
Yeah, totally. That's so interesting. I also think like it came out in what it was 63, right? When it came out.
Mhm.
Like I could actually imagine some women, well, girls then, taking that on a date and being like, hey, I
Would
would
you
do
like to
that.
take a look?
Yeah.
I've bookmarked it for you.
I used to force like my guy friends to do those quizzes, like whenever they would have like a little, because even in 17, they would have something
Hmm.
like that where it'd be like for the boys, and it was like a little part of the quiz, like that had like three
Oh
questions
yeah.
or something.
Well, reviewing the magazines when I was looking through them, I don't know, earlier or later last year, like I'd forgotten, and I don't know how I'd forgotten that about once a year they would do like we quizzed guys on their answers to questions. And so you'd have all these guys, and most of the time they'd be saying pretty anodyne things where you're like, okay, but then you would have some guys who were just like revealing their true selves in like we were like, ew, ew, gross. And like they'd have their picture on there with it. And I was just thinking these like they would never survive today. You would never survive it. They give it, and they were only giving a first name and a age. Man, those boys would be getting roasted hard.
Should make like a
I mean,
social media series of those.
seriously, and be like, where are they now? Who are they now? And it's like, like many things, I think that our generation has been reflecting on, like, I'm so glad that they didn't have social media then. I'm so glad that this didn't exist then. And I think, I mean, yeah, it's a bad point of view, but I know that I spouted off so many points of view when I was a teenager that I would be so embarrassed to hear back now or to have like written down somewhere permanent. Like, ugh.
I
I mean,
know.
people say a lot of things when they're teenagers, when they're figuring out like their own opinions and also how people react to those opinions.
Yeah, totally. It's like, yeah, there's so much less freedom to like have a conversation these days without
Mm-hmm.
like huge blowback in every direction. It's like, I
Mm-hmm.
feel like, oh God, I know. I have my youngest is turning 11 next month. So I've got 11, 14, and almost 17. And I'm just like,
Mm-hmm.
really hope that y'all don't mess up online.
I know. I know. And it's like, when we were online back then, it was a different situation altogether, and you were almost never yourself online anyway. You were always under handles, and also everybody was lying constantly.
Yes.
So it was a totally different thing. Where now it's like if you say something online, like you're coming in as yourself, which there's a lot of good about that. There's no, the fact that so many social media things actually like will ask, I mean, you have to be yourself by your name. And like that is probably a good thing, but also, ugh,
Yeah.
I would not want to see, I would not want to reread a lot of the things that I said,
Yeah.
like on DMs or, on AOL Instant Messenger. And, nowadays you'd screenshot it and reshare it. Like,
No,
ah,
forever, like until the end of
uh-huh.
time. Like I was thinking about LiveJournal and MySpace and
Oh, yeah.
AOL chat rooms, which I think
Yep.
where like decency goes to die. Like
Hmm.
I'm just like, oh, I'm so glad that that LiveJournal's gone forever. Like I
Oh, I mean, I remembered my old live journal. I go back to some night. I will definitely not say what the name of it is on this podcast because it does, I believe, still exist there. And I went back and looked at it, and I think I kept it through, oh, I don't know, early 2004. Oh, and after that, that's when I transitioned over to MySpace blogs, which I loved doing because all my friends were on MySpace.
yeah.
And so I felt like I was really writing just for them. And I was a very reluctant mover over to Facebook off of MySpace. And I was like one of the last people dragging my feet from my friend group because they all went over there. And so I was like, I guess I gotta go. But I did really like MySpace blogs. It just felt more, I don't know, safe. It felt more enclosed. It was kind of in that way, it was kind of like LiveJournal, where it's like would have to know somebody's handle in order to be able to see it and
Hmm.
re-find it.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. I mean, it was so quaint in so many ways. I think the catfishing was like maybe
Hmm.
worse than it is today because there are some protections
Yeah.
now, but like other than that, I mean, but like I remember being like 13 and like pretending that I was like way older on
Hmm.
in chat rooms and just talking about like makeup and stupid shit like that. But I'm like, yeah, I'm 22. What concealer do you use? Like, why do I need to be 22? I don't know.
I so like when my friend was an early adopter of the internet, this would have been it would have had to have been 1994 or early 1995. Her dad worked in computers. I couldn't tell you anything more beyond that. But she had AOL, and so we set up our handles, and I was 12 at the time, and I did teen in NC, which I was like, I'm not actually a teen. I'm not even 13 yet. And I remember being like, I can't believe I'm getting away with this. And like, she befriended a guy who, I mean, she was a year older than me. So, I mean, she was actually 13, befriended a guy who lived like in Denver. We were in North Carolina. He was 17. They had this like, long, like online relationship. And then he had bought a plane ticket to come visit her, still thinking she was 17, which is what she'd lied being. And so she finally like had to like she had the shit moment, and so she told her parents, and they like made her call him and tell him like, I'm only 13, you probably shouldn't come visit me. And it was just like this happened very, very early in my online life. And that's one of those things like you don't forget. Like you hold the lesson of that the rest of your life. That made me very, very wary from there on out forever of being like, are you even a person though? I don't know.
Totally. And it's really interesting that you brought that up as like a lesson because in your book, it's like all of these lessons that are like really just
Oh,
misguided things, but like it sort of just like shows like you have to be in the world to learn about the world. Like it's like there's
yes.
just no hack and there is no predictability. Like I think that like I don't know that there are very many adults I know who believe in the chaos that the world actually is. Like we all think we're
Hmm.
controlling our outcome and our
Yes.
safety and all these things. And like, I don't know, I grew up where there were a lot of hurricanes, so I have never really been able to rely on anything, you know. So I'm just like,
Uh-huh.
when COVID happened, I was like,
Yes, it does, right?
yeah, like it's cool. um, but yeah, like that's really, really smart, especially for teenagers. It's like you have to go to the mall. You have to talk to human beings. You have to embarrass yourself. You
Oh
have to
yeah.
like to figure out how you'll react to real people. Like you can pretend you're whatever you want to be online, but you're not.
Absolutely. But yeah, I mean, you've got to have those friendships where you're not just texting each other, but like where you're actually sitting across from each other, seeing if you actually have things to say, or if it's just like you text when you know what I mean? I think that that's something I see nowadays where so many people have, the I don't remember the word. It's not parasocial, but just relationships with people who they basically never actually hang out with, which like for me as somebody deeply like involved in the lit world but living in Omaha, Nebraska, like that is a lot of my work connections are all people who I know through the internet. Like I Zoom with them, I message with them, I do social networking with them, but like we don't really hang out except for at AWP, which is always kind of weird because it's like, wait, you're actually, oh, you're a person again. But
Yeah.
I think for teens who are like learning relationships, like both romantic ones, but also like how do you manage, I don't know, just the myriad things in adolescence that like you have to deal with people as everybody's growing and changing at different times and different timelines. You
Yeah.
have to navigate that, and the only way to navigate it is by like being like by navigating it. You can think you know what you would do, might be what you'd actually do, might not.
Yeah. Totally. Awesome. Well, I think that's like a perfect way to like wrap up. Is there anything you want to say about your book? I know you're coming here to Seattle next month. I'll try to get this out next week. So whatever, I'll probably cut that little moment out. But but if you want to talk about like anything else about the book and also like your schedule for going places if you know it, can.
Sure. Yeah. So coming up next week, actually, I'm going to be in Hastings, Nebraska at Hastings College. I'm excited to go there and I'll be doing a workshop and reading. And then at the end of, well, it's actually on the 1st of April, I will be in Connecticut at Sacred Heart University doing another workshop and reading. And then mid-month in April, I will be at it's called Desert Grit Reading Series in Scottsdale, Arizona. And then I will be up in Portland reading with Chelsea Bondolillo in like 2 days after that. And then I'll be back in Kearney doing something for the public library and points unknown at that point. I was able to, on my release day, actually, I went up to a local middle school, not middle school, a local high school, and I was able to talk to the teen girls. It was a all girls high school in the who are doing a lit journal. And let me just say, like that was kind of a delight to be able to spend publication day with a bunch of teen girls, kind
That's
of getting to
amazing.
see like because I was a lit journal head back in high school. I, was the lit journal editor in chief and what have you. And it's one of those things that it's a foundational experience at the time. You don't realize that. But I look at that now and I'm like, that without that, I mean, I probably wouldn't be who I am and where I am now. So it's just it was nice. It was nice to go back and be like, hey guys, let me tell you about where like things you might be interested in following. And like you too can like follow these paths that I didn't even know were open to me when I was their age.
That is amazing. I love that. I think that's so great. And I often feel like the best thing that we can do is mentor girls, like just
Absolutely.
make space for them to not be in any way enemies of older women, like,
Yes.
just like totally disrupt this narrative that we're in competition with youth and like all of that stuff. And so I love that you did that. And I think this book would be great for definitely for adults, but like it does seem like it would be really good for teenagers.
I
Um,
think so. Even it'll be just as funny to them reading about the social rules of the 90s, just like I thought the social rules of the 60s. 30 years, 30 years, 30 years. All
yeah,
and 30 years later, everything seems ridiculous.
it's so true.